Good night, everyone. Tonight I want to make a review of John Maddox's debate with John Gleason, a Godless engineer. And John Gleason, he did post on his channel today a section of this debate a couple of weeks ago. And I want to give some comments about this debate, and then I will open microphone so everyone can come in and have a chat and we can discuss this debate. So I will start right now with the video here.
I mean, all I asked him to do was differentiate it from cause and effect. And he says that if then is literally a cause and effect. And then he asked me if it requires foreknowledge. And I was trying to answer that question. And I don't think in this particular context, it requires foreknowledge. In actual programmatic coding of like computers and other things, it does require foreknowledge of it. But I don't think in the context of DNA code, it does require foreknowledge because.
Why not, John? It's exactly the same thing. You have also information stored in the DNA molecule, and that information instructs precisely how proteins are synthesized in the cell, which will become molecular machines, which are used to do every kind of task which is life essential in the cell. So this complex instructional codified information in the same sense as we have computer coding. There is no difference. That is not an analogy. This is the real thing. That's exactly what happens in the cell, John. So this is prescribed information, the sequence which dictates how proteins are expressed. That sequence is not simply due to chance or a physical necessity. That sequence is complex and specified in the same sense as I, as a machine designer, I need to specify the exact sizes and dimensions and the materials that are required to make a machine for a specific goal. That's what happens in the cell as well. The DNA stores information which is like a blueprint, and that blueprint instructs how to make molecular machines. And that is prescribed information. So claiming that no prescriber or no instructor or no information giver is required, that is just a nonsense.
At the heart of it, they're chemical reactions. And these chemical reactions happen regardless of what happens after it. So in evolutionary theory, what it actually says in evolutionary theory is that these chemical reactions occur, and through a long process of, you could say, trial and error and just things chemically reacting with other things, that it eventually led down a path to where they operate like this. That's
well, John, you make here a very basic mistake. You are conflating evolutionary theory with abiogenesis. These are two different things. The origin of the genetic code, the origin of the DNA molecule, the origin of the genetic information, and the origin of the machinery which expresses the information, that is the RNA polymerase, then messenger RNA, then the ribosome, and then the signal recognition particle, and the machinery which transports the protein to its final destination. These are all things which have to be there when life started. So we are talking here about an origin of life problem and not a revolutionary problem. And there was no evolution because evolution depends on DNA replication, and DNA replication had to be there when life started. So it is also a abiogenesis problem. So you have to explain this through chance or through intelligent design. You are bringing in evolution without justification.
That's what evolutionary theory actually says. So it has a naturalistic explanation that is perfectly reasonable and in line with how we think about other natural things that occur in our reality.
So how is that perfectly reasonable, John? Think about this. The smallest bacteria, which is free living, which can synthesize all the basic building blocks of life, is Pelagibacter ubique. This is a bacteria which is free living. It has about 1.3 million nucleotides, and these nucleotides, they instruct how to make everything required for that bacteria to be living and self-replicate. So if you think that that sequence of 1.3 billion nucleotides came by chance, then you have the odds of 10 to the 700,000 of power. There are 10 to the 80 atoms in the universe. This is a situation which is far beyond what chance can accomplish. That should be reasonable. I don't think that is reasonable, John. This is irrational to suppose that this is possible. And you can put here millions of years or billions of years or trillions of years. It doesn't matter. Then there is another very, very severe problem, John. DNA and all the other molecules that are required, they are not just free floating on the prebiotic earth. In the cell, they are synthesized by very complex machinery, by proteins, which is actually what we try to explain through this whole biosynthesis pathway, which in the end makes proteins. So these molecules, they were not free floating on the prebiotic earth. So how do you explain that? And another very severe problem is that these molecules, they would, rather than to complexify, they would disintegrate, in special if they would be exposed to UV radiation. So Steve Benner has published a science paper in 2012 in regards of the different paradoxes in the origin of life, and he mentioned that the asphalt problem is something that is very severe, that these molecules, they would simply disintegrate. DNA would not complexify to become more and more complex and form more and more different strings of genes and then bear information. The contrary is the case. If there would be some polymers on the prebiotic earth, they would simply disintegrate.
So I'm just kind of curious what to him screams supernatural in this whole idea that there are if-then gates in DNA code, when it seems to me like these if-then gates are really just cause and effect of chemical reactions. And over long periods of time, these chemical reactions have resulted in processes that have existed for a long time.
This is a very basic misunderstanding on what happens on the molecular level, John. It is always a tandem of information which instructs molecular machines to exercise functions which are very precise, and they are as well controlled by machinery which controls that the functions which these proteins exercise are done in the right way. So you have information over information, and the whole entire synthesis pathway of producing proteins has several steps of error check and repair mechanisms. Just to give you an idea, the ribosome has 11 different error check and repair mechanisms. And if a protein is wrongly synthesized, there are mechanisms to catabolize it, and then the basic amino acids, they are reutilized in the cell in order to consume less energy. So we have a fully autonomous, self-functioning, robot-like factory on a molecular level, which knows how to consume as little energy as possible. It has recycle mechanisms. It has waste disposal mechanisms. It knows how to import materials, how to export materials. It is a fully autonomous, robot-like, self-replicating factory in a literal sense. How do you want to explain this by natural means and by unguided events through long periods of time, John? This is just irrational, pseudoscientific nonsense.
Okay, go ahead, LPP. Take as much time as you need now.
I'm not really sure what kind of a question that was. I guess the complete and utter fascinating ignorance of the talking point just spewed by my opponent is that it is a well-established premise that deterministic chemistry, and I'm paraphrasing a quote here, deterministic chemistry no longer accounts for what we are discovering in biology. And I mean, I can literally pull up the paper and show you the quote if you want, or you can read the entire paper.
Well, I mean, I don't have to read the
it's
paper.
my turn to respond, right?
Tell me how.
I literally explained one of them to you, which obviously went over your head. But let's go with the second one. So we have, you claim it is nothing but cascade chemical reactions. Well, what we're discovering with structural biology is that things are happening in literally different spatiotemporal regions that are happening simultaneously to another one that are then used in conjunction, but there was no initial cause and effect of the process to occur. So when you look at that way, you have, from a reality perspective, you have two separate functions being executed simultaneously, but then conjoined to have a alternative outcome. And this is reduced to such a simplistic, it's not simplistic, but such a fundamental component of life, which is the ribosome and the translation of mRNA into a polypeptide. There is no chemical reaction between the codon and the amino acid. It is literally being read. This is a recognized premise in biology, in cellular biology, information theory, that there is literally a read of data being executed by the ribosome. There is no.
So John is making a very important point here. The transfer RNA is the adapter molecule, which has on the one side the triplet codon, and then on the other side the right amino acid, which then is loaded with through the amino acid tRNA synthetase, and then it is charged and added to the polypeptide chain, which adds to make the protein. So there is a distance between one side of the tRNA where the codon sequence is, and the anticodon of the tRNA, which recognizes the codon of the messenger RNA, and then the assignment of the amino acid, and this is the codified translation. And that is an assignment, and assignments, they do not occur spontaneously by random luck. They are assigned by intelligence. And this is a crucial problem which has no explanation through materialistic science. There is no way that non-intelligent mechanisms can make assignments of meaning. And science has no clue how that occurred on the early Earth. And John probably doesn't understand this. I would suggest that he actually reads the science papers which explain this, and then he will understand what John is talking about.
No chemical reaction. So to argue that there's nothing but cause and effect, chemistry is absolutely eviscerated at the fundamental of the creation of a protein. There is no chemical reaction between them.
So maybe you can explain to me what it means for it to read the RNA.
It is registering that it is the correct amino acid which matches to the codon. But and the reason that we know that it's being read beyond doubt is that even if there is a incorrect or a correct codon anticodon match, but the incorrect amino acid is being transferred by that tRNA, the ribosome then ejects that amino acid because it's not the correct one. And this is also a registered premise in all the things that are happening with DNA computation systems that are being built right now. We've programmed ribosomes to read syntax that's been devised by humans. So, like, this is not a questioned premise in genetics and biology. It's only questioned by atheists who are desperate to avoid it.
No, I reject that notion entirely. I don't understand. Hold on, I don't understand how you're not how you're not seeing that it is in fact a chemical reactions when one chemical reacts with some organelle, and in that reaction it generates another chemical. Like, this sounds like a chemical reaction. So I mean, how exactly is it not like, how do you I guess let's get down to it. Like, what do you define as a chemical reaction exactly?
Did you?
Well, John, I want to read you about this fascinating thing in regards of the ribosome. The more that science advances, it gets aware about the complexity of the ribosome. And here I will read you what I did investigate very recently. The setup of a language, and upon it, the programming of a completely autonomous communication network, which directs the operation of a complex factory, which during operation error checks and performs repairs to make specific purposeful products, is always the product of an intelligent agency. Ribosomes are molecular factories with complex machine-like operations. They carefully sense, transfer, and process continually, exchange and integrate information during the various steps of translation within itself at the molecular scale, and amazingly, even make decisions. They form complex circuits. They perform masterfully long-range signaling and perform information transfer between remote functional sites. They communicate in a coordinated manner, and information is integrated and processed to enable an optimized ribosome activity. Strikingly, many of the ribosome functional properties go far beyond the skills of a simple mechanical machine. They choreograph, collaborate, modulate, regulate, monitor the translation status, sensor quality, synchronize, and coordinate extremely complex movements like rotations and elongations, even helped by external synchronization systems, to direct movements during translation. The whole system incorporates 11 ingenious error check and repair mechanisms to guarantee faithful and accurate translation, which is life essential. The ribosome had been operational when life began. This means the origin of the ribosome cannot be explained by Darwinian evolution. No wonder does science confess that the history of these polypeptides remains an enigma. But for us theists, the enigma has an explanation. An intelligent cognitive agency, a powerful creator, God, through his direct intervention, wonderful creative force and activity, created this awe-inspiring life-essential factory inside of many orders of magnitude greater cell factories, fully operational right from the beginning.
Listen to a word that I said, or just fly over your head? There is no chemical reaction between the codon of the mRNA and the amino acid. There is no chemical reaction. This is a well-recognized premise. And if you want,
I guess I just simply don't recognize that particular premise, because you literally have chemicals interacting with organelles, and those organelles are interacting with those things.
Well, John, what John Maddox is saying in regards of the translation in the ribosome has absolutely nothing to do with organelles. So you are just demonstrating your total lack of understanding about what John is trying to explain to you.
Anything about
these chemical interactions?
Do you know anything about protein synthesis?
I mean, I don't think that we have to get into like protein synthesis and everything.
Well, if you're gonna...
Well, this is just what John is talking about, and you have no clue what he's talking about. So you are debating a topic which you have no understanding at all about, and that is clearly demonstrated by the explanations and answers which you give, which are totally inadequate in regards of the problem which is discussed.
Argue
Just denying
chemical reactions.
these are chemical reactions happening.
Explain this, and I'm literally telling you that it is a recognized fact that there is no chemical reaction in the reading process of the data set, which is represented by the codon in an mRNA, and the amino acid that is now being inserted into a polypeptide sequence or turned into a protein. This is a recognized premise. It's a question, it's a gigantic question in origin of life research of, we do have arbitrary data values that we have to account for. What the heck do you think is one of the fundamental things they're doing in origin of life research? There's papers that are being published this year trying to come up with theories of how they can explain this arbitrary value assignment to the genetic code. Like, there's papers out there yin yang on this, and you're claiming that's false.
How? No, that's not anything that I said. It would behoove you not to strawman me or to put words in my mouth. I'm just saying that's not how adult conversations work. Okay, so I don't understand. Regardless of whether or not I'm right or wrong about chemical reactions in reading RNA. Regardless of that, how does this exactly apply to evolution and whether or not it's natural?
But first of all, John, as I explained before, the origin of this whole thing of translation has absolutely nothing to do with evolution. It is an abiogenesis problem. But I want to point out how huge that problem is in demonstrating the complexity to synthesize a ribosome. So here, I have an article about the assembly of the bacterial ribosome. This is the ribosome. And this is the ribosome, the RNA part of the ribosome. It is composed of ribozymes and proteins, and this is one of the RNA structure of the ribosome. And this kind of complexity has to emerge prebiotically, without evolution. These are all the parts that are required, about 80 different proteins on average. In eukaryotes, it's more complex than in prokaryotes. So there are many different proteins and RNA-based ribozymes which have to come together to construct such a ribosome. And over 200 different scaffold proteins are required to make the ribosome, and over 75 different cofactors. And all this complexity had to emerge prebiotically, without evolution. So you have here two explanations, either random chance or intelligent design. And the assembly process has to be choreographed in a very specific, very precise, coordinated manner. It cannot be just so. So just to give an idea about the complexity that we are talking about here. And the ribosome is just one molecule of 25 very complex complexes which have to come together in a joint venture to be able to synthesize proteins.
Okay, so going back to one of the fundamental points of all of this is, if a programming code base is required for functions and processes and capacity that is required for biological systems to exist, requires arbitrary data value assignment and prescriptive knowledge and formal information structure, in order for the simplest elements of life to exist. How do you explain that occurring through undirected process? Because if you're going to go down that rabbit hole and say it can happen through undirected process, then let's go back to your assertion that no, PHP couldn't exist without a designer. So how could a computer code come into existence? How could binary come into existence without an intelligent agent to assign the values to each side of the data set?
Well, as far as binary goes, I don't think that you could get that naturally. If there is some natural reason why those things would exist, then they would be natural. But I also don't think that binary code is directly correlates to genetic code.
Okay, so you do realize that MIT, Cambridge, several universities in India, I believe, have actually literally written their own programming languages that translate from binary directly into genetic programming, right? And
well, I mean, regardless, hold on. If you're going to mention something, you got to let me respond to it, John. You can't just disconnect me.
I'm going to directly respond to your first part of your question. You said specifically that you did not see how binary could be corollary to genetic code. Okay, so are you, number one, are you admitting that there is a code?
DNA can be interpreted as a code.
No, is it literal or figurative?
It is my belief that DNA can be interpreted as a code.
So not a literal one.
But it's ultimately a chemical that goes through different chemical reactions.
Well, John, again, you don't know anything about what you are saying. Here we go. The language of DNA is digital, but not binary. The binary encoding has 1 and 0 to work with. 2, hence that it's binary. DNA has 4 positions, T, C, G, and A. These are the 4 nucleotides. Whereas the digital byte is mostly 8 binary digits, the DNA byte, called a codon, has 3 digits. That is the 3 digits which are assigned to the amino acids, to the 20 amino acids. There are 64 possible values, of which 61 code for amino acids and 3 codons are stop signs. Now, this is very interesting. You need stop signs in order to instruct when the translation process has to finish. And if you don't have that, then you cannot have a sequence, a protein sequence of a specific size and value. So if you don't have these 3 stop codons, you cannot have life. And how do you explain that assignment of 3 codons to a stop sign? This is very clearly evidence of intelligent design, where these were assigned with the purpose to in order to instruct the size of a protein, of an amino acid sequence.
Different processes.
So were you paying attention at all during my opening?
I mean, yes, I've been paying attention to you.
Okay, so are you suggesting that you should fly over to the Royal Society and tell them that's not a literal code?
I would still appreciate you not, doing questions like that, because obviously
you don't understand what John is talking about, John. That's the fact.
That's not what I'm suggesting. Obviously, I'm not an expert.
It's exactly what you're saying.
You are not an expert, and you don't have even a basic understanding about molecular biology, John. I mean, you have just embarrassed yourself in this debate, and I don't know why you even accepted to have it. And I mean, we see in your YouTube channel that your aim is to destroy creationist arguments, but in this episode, you have just destroyed yourself by demonstrating that you have no clue what you are talking about.
And you're not an expert in this field, John.
Yes, John is an expert. You are not an expert because you don't know even what is being talked about.
So my point is that
the point is that you have no point, John. You have no point. You say that chemical reactions govern molecular biology, and that demonstrates your total lack of understanding of biology and biochemistry.
So that the context in which we were talking about code is different for binary as it is when we're talking about DNA code.
Okay,
those
okay, let me address
separate things that don't necessarily correlate.
Okay, let me address
because we have natural I'm still talking. We have natural explanations for how the DNA code evolved.
No, we don't. First of all, as John already pointed out, it is not an issue about evolution. And I want to tell you something else, John. There are several problems here. Also, the DNA molecule is complex. It is composed of three parts: of the base, of the backbone, the ribose, and the phosphate. And these three parts have to be joined together in the right way. So, how did prebiotic occurrences orchestrate this? And how did they know that that would then be possible to use that composition of a molecule as an information-bearing molecule? That doesn't work, John. There is no foreknowledge and foresight of chemicals and how to make a hard disk or a hard drive or a information-bearing molecule.
No, we have explanations for that. What we don't have a natural explanation for is how binary code could have come about without humans inventing it, knowing to interpret low voltage values as 0 and high voltage values as 1, and then arranging them in specific orders in order to communicate meaningful messages. What we do have for DNA, though, is chemical processes that occur, and over long periods of time, those chemical processes result in different configurations of life that either die out and are no more because they're not keen on surviving in whatever environment. And then you have these other processes that arise, these other chemical reactions that happen that do allow the organisms to survive, and they keep procreating. They keep changing their information through reproduction and different mutations, and it just keeps evolving into these new processes.
Well, this is just a bunch of unsupported pseudoscientific beliefism in evolution, John. You just believe all this, what you are saying is true, but you have no evidence. You don't understand what you're saying. You just think that because that is the consensus in biology, it must be true, but you don't understand what you're saying. You are just parroting pseudoscientific nonsense.
So I hope that you can kind of see now how I'm separating out the two different contexts in which these codes have arisen.
Okay,
one was definitely man-made, and the other one was definitely natural.
Okay,
wow,
so
definitely natural. And how do you know that, John? Besides believism, you don't know that. You just believe it.
I'm just going to be very direct and say that Godless. I don't know how you put engineer at the second part of your name. Because if you, number one, your level of ignorance on this topic is so mind-bending.
And yeah, John, and put mind-bending in it. It is really an exposure of completely a lack of knowledge in molecular biology. John, you need to do better, and you are really embarrassing yourself in this debate with John Maddox.
I do not know how you actually think you're making a remotely coherent separation of these things. Okay, so first off, how is binary and genetic code corollary? Okay, so A in binary equals 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. In genetic code, AUG equals start. I mean, there's syntax for what this codon, this triplet of base pairs, equals, does not become, does not transform into, is equal to this amino acid. I mean, this is such basic logic. I really don't understand how you're trying to argue this is separate. Number two, as I've already stated before you made this assertion, your claim that we just already know that the genetic code evolved naturally, did you not listen to a word that I have said? Because I have addressed this multiple times and stated clearly that we don't know how it evolved. What the heck do you think the $10 million is on the line for? Right now, as we speak. That video I showed from the Royal Society, that was from June of last year.
And the problem is actually at least twofold, John. First of all, science has no clue how the assignment emerged prebiotically, but then as well the information, how the right sequence was stored in the genome in order to make the minimal proteome essential for life to kickstart. So these are two different separate problems. We have several problems here. We have the hardware problem. Science doesn't know how to make DNA, how to make nucleotides, how to make amino acids, how to select them from a pool of hundreds of different amino acids, supposedly extant of the early Earth. Science has no clue how to make the phospholipids. Science has no clue how to make the carbohydrates. Science has no clue how to fix nitrogen and carbon, essential, because this is not these are not atoms readily alive available on the prebiotic Earth. So these are all open questions. Science has no clue how to polymerize RNA, how to make strings that are sufficiently long and stable in order to become self-replicating. There is no clue how RNA the transition occurs to DNA. There is no clue how the machinery emerged to transcribe and translate the information from DNA into getting proteins. Science is completely in the dark in regards of all these questions. So the information problem, actually, to which the Royal Society is giving $10 million, that is just a tiny problem. Even if we would find an explanation of the information or the right sequence to have a minimal proteome, that still doesn't explain how the genetic code emerged, how the materials emerged in the prebiotic Earth, how they were joined together, and all these kind of things. So the problem is huge, and science is really in the dark. After 70 years, science has absolutely no explanation whatsoever in any of all those questions.
That money has not been won. There are paper after paper. I read several of them this past 2 weeks on the latest quote-unquote quasi-theories of how it could possibly have come into existence. They do crazy crap like, oh, well, if only 50% of it had to come into existence at one time, then maybe at some point, if the wobble effect kicked in at the very end, the last stage, then we could have a code. It's like, get out of town. So some of the most vital components of this code, they don't have to exist right away, even though our logic doesn't apply unless we have it at the front end. I mean, is it not computing the direct corollary between binary and genetics? Because there's papers I can pull up right now on how they've done studies comparing the genetic code to a literal million other possible code bases and found that it's the most optimal. So was that all hypothetical, or were they actually doing direct comparison to a code base and its redundancy, its robustness, and its ability to store data?
I mean, evolutionary theory would suggest that
Evolutionary theory hasn't to suggest anything, John, because this is an abiogenesis problem, which you still didn't grasp. Even when John explained it to you several times during the debate, you didn't get it.
reason why it's the most optimal is because of the fact that it's had millions of years in order to work out certain kinks that, so some of the processes that would have resulted would not have been the most optimal path.
So this is just a faith-based, nonsensical claim. As explained before, the materials like the nucleotides, they would simply disintegrate on the prebiotic earth, and then you would never have an information-bearing molecule.
So it seems to me like evolution, naturalistic evolution, has just as good of an explanation as your God did it explanation.
Only in your wishful thinking, John. Only in your wishful thinking, in your biased mind.
If not more, if not better, a better explanation for
Sure.
it. So, I mean, I do remember you questioning whether or not I'm an engineer, how I can put an engineer after my name, which...
Well, actually, you are not an engineer, you are not a designer, you have no clue at all about the whole topic, John. So back to the study table and start at the basic biology and biochemistry books. Get an education. In the next time, you don't embarrass yourself as you have done in this debate with John Maddox.
I mean, I'm not even going to dignify because that's just an ad hominem low blow attack, and it's honestly sad, seeing that come from you. Not surprising.
I told you what I did. What did you do? You dismissed my arguments, so back up your claims.
So if someone wants to come in and have a chat about this video, feel free to come in. The link is in the dialogue. Hi, Tony.
Yeah. The best part was, definitely the information, and of course, Diet Coke.
Yeah, that was really fun. The Diet Coke part.
It's just chemical reactions.
He didn't show that in. I mean, when I saw this video today at his channel, I thought that he would give an afterthought about the debate, Tony, and then I said, well, that's interesting. Let's put it for debate tonight. And then I did set it for tonight, and I watched it, and I saw that it wasn't anything new. It was just a repetition of the debate, and I was thinking to myself, wow, is this guy not aware about how embarrassing that the whole debate was? Why does he repost it at his channel? I mean, is he not aware about that?
That was embarrassing. And Professor Dave is even more arrogant. I like the part when he mentioned the DNA sequencing machine. He said, all we have to do is run these chemicals through these machines. And by the way, they use pre-existing proteins and enzymes just to get them started.
I mean, that was really ridiculous. And you see, when I posted it at the comment section of the video, he was going to delete every post of mine where I propagated my channel and the review. I mean, if he would be an open-minded guy, he would actually permit criticism and then respond to it. But that's what he's not about.
And he thinks he refuted James Tour. Unbelievable. Not even close. That's a joke, man.
Yeah. He's a joke.
Total.
He's a joke, and John has also demonstrated that he has no grasp. Jimmy Snow was the same thing. I mean, they are all demonstrating their total lack of understanding of the topic.
Absolutely. There is no chance of genetic code generating itself anywhere under any natural chemistry.
Not only the genetic code, the DNA molecule, the RNA molecule, the information content to start everything. And even if you have all this, you need the machinery to transcribe and translate it. That wasn't there. So
Wasn't there.
I mean, they are getting more and more aware that you need everything in place right from the start in order to work. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
nothing done. That
You know,
story.
and Professor Dave still goes to the primitive cell argument. He always says, "Oh, well, you're talking about cells today," but there is a minimum requirement of proteins and enzymes that you need.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, as I said in my reply to his video, if you don't have just one protein like topoisomerase or the import proteins to import the metals and molybdenum and iron and sulfur, then you have no life. I mean, there is a minimal set of proteins that has to be there right from the beginning.
Yeah. He
And
talked about that too. All left-handed ones, which he said he has a solution for. I didn't hear it though.
yeah, he came up with a bunch of nonsense. That's the truth.
Yeah.
And I mean, the minimal cell that they usually propose has about 500,000 nucleotides. But when I was going to investigate this, then I saw that mycoplasma, for example, which is supposed to be the minimal living cell, it is not free living. It is a pathogen which is living in a host where it gets the nutrition like amino acids. So that is not the minimal free living cell. The free living one is like over 1 million nucleotides.
Yeah.
You need to take a bacteria which can synthesize all the 20 amino acids because for example, in the Miller-Urey experiment, they didn't make tryptophan, they didn't make 8 of the amino acids used in life, and they are not extant, just laying around on the prebiotic earth.
Exactly. Then he said protocells, somehow they could generate right-handed sugars, and then RNA would be in some environment where it would just slip into these membranes.
That was ridiculous. Yes.
Ridiculous.
So he thinks that from a membrane which encapsulates RNA, you can go from there to a fully self-replicating cell with ribosomes and everything else.
Right. What a joke. Well, we got some people in the chat. Paul of Speed of Pudding, if they want to come in.
I mean, Michael is afraid to come in. Yeah, Paul, come in.
Come on in, Paul, if you have any solutions for abiogenesis, origin of life. They don't have anything. They're just sure it wasn't God.
If it wasn't God, what was it, Paul?
Oh, he doesn't know. Aliens.
Yeah, he says abiogenesis isn't an issue about atheism, but I think this is a very core problem. If you can't solve the origin of life problem, how can you sustain your worldview based on materialism?
Right. It's their foundation. You got to get life from non-life.
That's a huge problem, and I mean, it is beautiful to see how they dance around nonsense.
Yeah. Many different hypotheses. You know, thousands of papers every year on abiogenesis, and guess what? They all fail.
They all fail. Yes.
They all fail. It all reaches a dead end. Every one of them.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Hey, John. Good evening.
Hey, what's up? Hey, guys. So I can only talk for just like 30 seconds. I'm going to the grocery store. So one point, Otangelo, is that it's my position that the genetic code is both an abiogenesis problem and an evolution problem. You were making the distinction, but I think it's both because you have to account for the different syntax and semantics of like prokaryote versus eukaryote, right? So that means there had to have been a evolutionary step for that as well. And then it's recognized that you have to have a complete semantic shift to the new code base. Otherwise, you have complete cascade failure. So there is no way around it having to be a 100% differentiation in meaning. Otherwise, you have death. Like there's no way around that. So you have to account for this both. How did it originally occur? And then how did it also evolve into the variety of variations that we're now aware of?
Sure.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, and
Oh.
the transition from prokaryotes to eukaryotes is also an unsolved problem. They have no clue how that could have happened. And they claim that it is with the endosymbiotic theory, but the mitochondria has about 20,000 nucleotides and a minimal free living bacteria 1.3 million nucleotides. So there is a huge reduction which would have had to occur. And also the mitochondrial code is different than the universal genetic code. So how did that transition occur? That are all unsolved problems.
Exactly. That's the point I'm making. It's like, hey, we got to account for all these different things. You can't even account for one of them, and yet supposedly we understand all of the above. Like, come on, get out of here.
They have a new hypothesis. Yeah, they have the chemical Big Bang. That's their new hypothesis, that everything was there all at once. That's what we've been saying for over 100 years.
Yeah, that's not the first time that they propose.
Hey, one more thing. I'm about to walk in the grocery store. One more thing. You might want to explain to the audience about how there is no chemical bond between the actual base pairs themselves. They only bond to the phosphate backbone. Therefore,
yes.
You are dealing 100% with random chance in terms of the organization of the sequence.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. That is the clay thing that T-Jump brought up, claiming that you can polymerize RNA on clay, which is also total nonsense.
Well, it's my understanding that clay had to be chemically stabilized for 24 hours and ran through machinery and all kinds of designed equipment before they did anything to it.
Yeah, I mean, that whole video of Professor Dave was just junk, pseudoscientific nonsensical science. So it was just ridiculous, pathetic.
Yeah. Well, $10 million for anybody that can do it without interference by the chemist.
Well, that's just the problem of information, but before that, you need to have the genetic code, and you have to have the RNA molecules and the DNA molecules, and how the transition occurred from RNA to DNA, which is extremely complex.
Yeah. Well, maybe speed of sound. He probably has the answers. He knows how to produce life.
Well, Speed doesn't want to come in. I don't know why, but I am not like him. When I show up at his channel, he never lets me in.
Yeah.
He's afraid of having a honest, straight talk. When he's here at my channel, he also avoids to come in and have an open chat. I don't know what the problem is, but
I don't know. I guess, yeah. Well, come on in, Speed. You got a PhD in chemistry, right? Why don't you come on in and educate us all? He's a joke.
Yeah.
They all are. They're all a joke, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tony's a bore. Yeah, come on in, Speed. You got a chemistry degree, right? Tell us how it's done.
Yeah, I wonder, Michael, if you say that information, as you did show that that science paper on the Royal Society, which confirmed that DNA was information, how did that come by natural means? I'm really curious to see your explanation on this.
Yeah, what is it, Speed? Come on in and tell us, educate us all. How does it work? How do you generate code through just unguided random chemistry?
Yeah, that is the problem. When you have a priori position, a bias, which you don't want to give up, then you just keep believing in something which makes no sense, and you're satisfied with that. And
Right.
it's more about emotion and what you want to be true rather than what is reasonable.
Yeah, random chemistry, Speed.
Yeah.
But a bunch of molecules on the early Earth. How are they going to generate code? Tell us how it's done.
First, you need to have RNA, and science has no clue how you make RNA on a prebiotic Earth. And then you need
how
to
do you make RNA? How do you make RNA on a prebiotic Earth, Speed? Come in and tell us. Moron.
Yeah.
What a moron.
Yeah, what is convincing, Paul? If the God claim is not convincing, how is the materialism claim convincing if science has demonstrated in over 70 years that there is no solution at all, only problems?
Right. How is abiogenesis convincing?
That is your only alternative. If it wasn't God that made life, it was random chance. How is random chance a reasonable explanation?
Yeah, they're not going to come in, though, because they have no answers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Santangelo. Keep it up, brother. God bless you.
Yeah, I'll finish my chat. Good night, everyone. Thank you for everyone that has assisted my episode tonight. See you next time. Bye-bye.